On this episode of Newt's World, Palladium Pictures Incubator Program is an initiative to fund and mentor the next generation of right-of-center filmmakers. The program helps emerging filmmakers produce outstanding, short documentaries. Each participant receives funding, mentorship, and assistance in distribution and marketing for a short documentary project. Palladium Pictures is currently accepting application for its 2025 class of Incubator Fellows, and the deadline to apply is December 5th, 2024. Here to talk about their incubator program of shaping future storytellers, I'm really pleased to welcome Thomas Pack of Palladium Pictures. Thomas, welcome, and thank you for joining me on Newt's World.
Thanks for having me, Newt.
First, Thomas, tell us a little bit about Palladium Pictures, who founded it, and how did you get involved?
Sure, absolutely. Well, it was about a year ago that I was on this podcast at the launch of the program with my father, Michael Pack, who's our director-producer here. You know, my family has been making documentary films for many decades. You know, we make long-form documentaries. Most of them have been on PBS. We now have a new series of short documentaries that we're doing with the Wall Street Journal called Wall Street Journal Opinion Docs. We have this experience in the documentary world, and we wanted to start this program because we feel like, you know, the culture matters. And for some reason, conservatives have more or less given up fighting for the culture in the space where it really needs to be fought, which is film, entertainment, the arts. And so we wanted to pass along some of our knowledge of how to make mainstream documentaries that can enter the cultural conversation, but from a conservative or right-of-center perspective.
When you say that, though, does this largely go to, like PBS, where you just showed Created Equal, Clarence Thomas in his own words? Where do the films go?
Sure. So we've just now wrapped our first set of incubator productions. So this year we had 4 people in the incubator, which means 4 up-and-coming filmmakers that we're mentoring, we're executive producing. We also fully fund the short project that we work on with them, and we help them with distribution and promotion. So this year, they're all have been launched on Real Clear Politics, which has been a great partner for us. And they're all doing pretty well. They launched last week, so it's brand new. They could be showed elsewhere, but you know, we think Real Clear is a good partner in part because they are part of, I think, the mainstream conversation. They're not seen as far-right media or anything like that. And the response to them has been really positive, I think, as a result.
People can go to Palladium Pictures at palladiumpictures.com and see these products. Is that right?
You can see them on our website, that's right, or you can see them on the Real Clear website. There's a page that has all of them, and there's individual pages. They're also released on the Real Clear YouTube and X, so we watch for free.
Can you talk about these first 4 incubator films? Because I remember when we were first talking about it, it was sort of a dream. You were going to do this, and now here we are getting caught up with, and you did it. Can you walk us through the 4 films?
We did it, and we're excited about it. It's a real reason to be enthusiastic because we think these 4 people really represent, you know, the future of filmmaking that is outside of the mainstream Hollywood orthodoxy. Would you like me to go through them one at a time or give them to you all at once?
Let's do one at a time because each are worth thinking about and talking about and also explaining who did it. I mean, part of what makes these exciting is that you're bringing a whole new generation of filmmakers out into the world.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. So the first one is called High Country Murder. And it's actually a true crime documentary. So our filmmaker is this woman, Keely Cuvello. She's on a team with her sister, and they go back to their hometown to solve a murder. And I won't spoil how it ends, but it's extremely dramatic, as you can imagine. So they kind of get closer and closer to finding out who the killer is. But also, it's beyond just being about a murder. It's really about their hometown in Mendocino, California, and how it's changed. It began as like rancher country with one type of American. And then at some point, hippies came in, and there was this cultural clash of more hippie culture, free love, free grow pot, that kind of world with the rancher culture. And This was 20 years ago, and since then it's sort of descended, and there's cartels, and there's a huge number of unsolved murders coming out of this exact part of town, partly because there's a lot of murder, and partly because the culture has changed that makes it difficult for people to come forward and difficult to solve them. So they uncover a lot of information about this murder, but they also uncover the story of Mendocino, California at the same time.
When Keely Covello decided to do this, who approached who and said, let's turn this into a film? I mean, were the sisters going to go do it anyway, or what's the deal?
They're independent filmmakers, and they make films about the West in general. So their last documentary was also about ranchers. It was not about a murder. Their whole thing, I think, is, America needs more myths and heroes, and we need to uncover the kind of drama of the American West. This was a film on their mind because it hit these themes about ranching culture. They've never done a murder before. They pitched it to us through this incubator, so they applied with the film idea. But I think that it's ambitious to do a film that is, I think I'm going to solve a murder. And they had to convince us that they could do it, and they did a great job.
This is what the French would call cinema verite. You're covering the raw edge of life as it's happening.
Yeah, and it's a tough thing to pitch for that reason, because you don't know what's going to happen. You know when you're going to go shoot, and you've done your research, and you've talked to people ahead of time, but things go wrong in production, and it's actually a little bit scary. There's a lot of cartels in this part of California.
That's what I was just thinking. The way you're describing that town, I don't know that I'm going to be the guy walking around carrying a camera.
Yeah, well, they were very concerned about that too, I think rightly. I think there's some act of bravery in shooting this particular documentary, actually.
So how long is High Country Murder?
High Country Murder, I think, is about 21 minutes or something like that.
That's amazing. All right, tell me about the next one.
Okay, so the next one is called The Bird and the Bee, and it's about the Babylon Bee and its fight with Twitter. So if you don't know the Babylon Bee, it's a Christian satire site. And they got kicked off of Twitter for posting what was called a transphobic tweet. And this film tells that story by talking to the guys that work there. So these kind of jokester comedians, Seth Dillon, who's the CEO, they get to tell their perspective of it. And what did it feel like to get kicked off of Twitter and have to make this choice, which is, do I click the button that says, yes, I'm a transphobe, and then get back on Twitter? Or do I choose to stay off Twitter, not knowing where my revenue is going to come from, not knowing the future of my company, but am I willing to kind of stick to my guns? And then at the end, they get swept up into something bigger because Elon Musk gets involved and talks to them and kind of starts to use them as a explanation for why he's buying Twitter. And so these kind of comedians get caught up in this very dramatic, bigger story about Twitter, about free speech on the internet, and about censorship and comedy.
I would have thought that Musk would have loved this story. I mean, it's the perfect example of what sort of sets him off.
I think that sometimes when he talks about why he bought Twitter, he does put this story front and center. And I think that he probably bought Twitter for many complicated reasons. But for his perspective, this is a good one to point to, because I think Americans feel differently about the censorship of, say, Donald Trump or Alex Jones or something. But many people think that this is a bridge too far. It's like, okay, now you're censoring someone who's clearly making a joke. I think you're right. It was a great thing for him to lean into as here's the problem with Twitter.
I think the Babylon Bee is a real asset to the culture because they're irreverent. They're a little bit like Mad Magazine 40 years ago. As a free society, you have to have some space to make fun of yourself.
Absolutely. It's hard to imagine a world, and I think this is why it bothers us so much to think about comedy being censored. I just think the world is a much worse place if we're not making fun of each other. And your point's more poignant, I think, often, if there's some irony in it. I think it's a great way to point out flaws in each other's arguments.
What's your third film?
The third film is called Spares, and it's about embryonic adoption, which is something that I frankly knew nothing about when we started this project. So for people that, like me, didn't know about it, when people go through IVF, they create sometimes extra embryos. And they have a choice about what to do with it. You can discard the embryos, you can keep them forever on ice, or you can put them up for adoption. Often, I think, lost in the conversation about IVF is that IVF doesn't necessarily mean destroying embryos. There are other solutions. So embryonic adoption is there are these people that are adopting other people's embryos. So the film talks to some families that chose to give up their embryos for adoption and some families that adopted other people's embryos, and kind of gets into the interesting ethics and different life that you get when you get pulled into this sort of relatively new embryonic technology.
Your fourth film.
Okay, the fourth film is called The Secret Game, and it's about this basketball game that happened in the 1940s. It's the first interracial basketball game. So it happened, there's this all-white Duke team, undefeated, can't find anyone that could beat them. And then across the street, there's this all-black NC Central team that is having the same problem. They're running up the score against everyone they play. And so obviously, these kids just want to play basketball and find out who's better. I mean, these are dominant teams. The politics of the time prevented it because it was illegal to play basketball, obviously. And also there were other tensions between blacks and whites in the Jim Crow, Durham, North Carolina. So they played this game, this secret underground game that an oral history of survives. So our film tells the story of that game.
Couple questions. I can't resist. Who won?
The NC Central team won, as maybe you might have guessed.
Which would have been an enormous shock had that been a public event.
Yeah. Well, the interesting thing is, so the coach of the NC Central team is this guy, John McClendon, who had a very illustrious Hall of Fame career and was integrating the NBA later. And he studied under Naismith, and he invented the full court press, the fast break. Like, he was thinking differently about basketball. So he had this team that played this radically different style of fast-paced, fast break basketball. And so it was blacks and whites. It's also two styles of play colliding. And basketball actually changed forever because of the fast break.
That particular film would make an unbelievable commercial movie as a drama.
I agree. We have a bit of a dramatization in the film because he brought some kids from a local high school to kind of reenact the game itself.
But can you imagine, the conversation, if you made it a full-length film and you have the conversations, you have the whole process of build-up, figuring out how to do it secretly. When did it finally become public?
That's a good question. So there's one journalist that was not allowed to write anything about it that was in the stands, and then otherwise was just the players. So over time, it sort of seeped out that it had happened. I think there was a book written about it. People have known about it for a long time, but I don't think a movie like that has ever happened. And it has all the drama, as you're saying, of just a great sports movie.
Are a number of the players still alive?
So this happened in the 1940s, so mostly not. We interviewed some family members of John McClendon, who was the coach. So he ended up being sort of the main character of our film. And so there are people still alive that are close to the story and know about it.
Given the technology of that period, nobody would have filmed it.
And nobody was allowed to film it.
Let's talk for a minute about these four independent producers. What motivates each of these people? When you deal with them, when you see them, what is it you see in them that makes you want to have them be the creative people you work with?
So when we put this call out, a year ago, and we made this push to find, documentary producer directors. By the way, at least one of these four heard about us first on Newt's World. So we reached out to them this sort of way. But when we did this, it turns out, I think that conservatives are coming from a more alternative way, more alternative paths. We don't have a clear ecosystem in film and entertainment the way that the left does with film schools and other training programs. So they all had different paths. I talked about Keeley, who makes sort of rancher movies. We have Jason, who did Spares. He runs an AI film studio, so he's trying to stay on the cutting edge of new technology in film and using AI art and AI music and other details like this. We have Matt Pearl, who made the Babylon Bee film, comes from the world of Catholic filmmaking. He works for a Catholic media company and wanted to sort of make something and do some independent work as well. And so this is sort of a divergence for him. And then Greg DeDoug, who worked on The Secret Game, has a lot of experience in sort of conservative nonprofit space in the video world. So they all come from different paths. We picked the people that we thought were sort of coachable. I mean, they're far enough along in their career. This isn't an entry-level program. They'd all shot documentaries before and knew how to do that. But we took people that we thought were coachable and also, had a deep understanding and creative vision for what a documentary is and how to put one together.
If somebody's accepted in the incubator program, what's the advantage?
Well, we fully fund their documentary short. So these are 15, 20 or so minute documentaries. We fully fund it up to $35,000 for the production. And at the end, we do distribution, and then an additional cost for us, we do promotion for it. So I think a lot of people do this because they like the idea of free money and help with distribution. These are great reasons. It's a good springboard for people's careers to get different kind of eyeballs on their film than what they're used to. But I think the main thing they get out of it is they get mentorship. We work with them. We check in every week. We do site visits. We look at every cut. And my father, Michael Pack, is a very well-established documentary producer-director. And so his sort of wisdom and mentorship, I think, having now done it for a year, I can tell you, I feel really confident that these 4 filmmakers are better at their craft than they were before. And I think that is the most important advantage, is actually becoming a better filmmaker.
When you get a group of applications, and my hunch is, as your program gets better known, you'll get more and more applications. What's the yardstick? What are the principles by which you measure an applicant to be part of your incubator program?
Yeah, it's a good question. So our goal, really broadly speaking, is to start to create the future culture shapers, people that are going to impact the way Americans think about the world. Documentaries have a long history of doing this in an important way. Yes, we want these projects to be successful, and we're really glad that these 4 are so far being very successful. We want to pick filmmakers that we believe in a major way. So the criteria for that has a lot to do with whether they understand the importance of the art side of documentary filmmaking and the journalism side, whether they're going to be honest and straightforward and ask the right questions, and whether they're going to be filmic and story-oriented. And when these sort of art and journalism pieces come together, those are the key ingredients, we think, into a great documentary filmmaker.
In the long run, if you look out, say, 10 years, what do you hope to have achieved? Will you routinely try to get 4 a year?
Yeah. So I think in the long run, we'd like to have more, our films are on PBS and speak to the mainstream. And we'd like, if filmmakers that came out of our program, we had a good number of them that were picking up the mantle of our company. But I think even in a more sort of aspirational sense, I see this as kind of the tip of the spear. I'm hoping that we have 4 great filmmakers and 4 great films that are out. And I'm hoping that this sort of proves something to the conservative donor class or whoever it is that decided that conservatives can't make good films and aren't good artists. And we get more programs. I mean, the left has a huge and incredibly vast ecosystem that is supporting their filmmakers, not just training them, but also they fund all these film festivals and these film schools. There's a lot of healthy amount of resources, which is, I think, there to be commended for creating this. But the right needs it too. And the reason that we don't make as good movies is because we're not fostering talent. So I'm hoping that this program is the first of many, and that we don't have to start all of them, but that we start a trend toward let people that have perspective that is outside of the mainstream start fostering culture-changing programs like this.
As a general principle, if I understand it, they probably should have made at least 1 film before they apply.
That's right. I think we have got kind of a unique niche for this program because you can't be entry level, just out of film school. You apply with a work sample. So you have to be able to demonstrate to us that you can make a film. We're going to give you some funds and you're going to have to put a crew together. You're going to have to do some research. You're going to have to shoot it. You have to already be a competent filmmaker, but you can't be so far along in your career that you don't need mentorships. But for that niche, there's a lot of independent filmmakers out there that really could use this kind of a break. And if you're not saying what the mainstream orthodox message wants you to say, there's not a lot of resources. So we're hoping to reach those people.
I'm just trying to understand this. You were able to bring in 4 films, wildly different topics, for about $35 or less each. Is that correct?
Yeah, actually last year was 30. This year we're going up to 35. So they spent $30,000 on their productions.
They obviously are pretty frugal.
Yeah. People, I think, sometimes don't know how much goes into these types of movies. It was a lot of their own sweat equity. They all worked super hard on it. And they all kind of had to figure out how to make these relatively low-budget films. But they did have the additional resource of our support. Beyond that, we helped them where we can. And then there was additional funds that went into distribution and promotion. This is what we did with $30,000 each. So imagine what these 4 people are going to do next. I think it's really exciting to think about the next step of their careers.
I'm curious from your standpoint. I mean, you sort of grew up inside a filmmaking family. Was it kind of preordained that you were going to be making movies?
No, not at all. I actually never thought I would be here. I spent a good amount of time working in educational nonprofits. I worked at the Intercollegiate Studies Institute, where I was director of student programs. I worked as a head of operations at a small arts and education organization. I liked running programs in educational space. And so, when my folks were starting an educational program, which is what this is, they wanted me to come back and run it. I'm also associate producing our films, including these shorts we're doing for the Wall Street Journal, and loving that. But it's funny how the world works. I was around film my whole life, never quite expecting that to be where I would spend my professional life. And yet here I am, and it's great. And there's a lot of advantages to working for your parents. There's some really nice things about that.
What you are doing and this whole program, the Palladium Pictures Incubator Program, this is exactly the kind of continuous growth, continuous exploration that has made this country so astonishing. And you're reaching out to what are really entrepreneurs. I mean, people who are out there on their own making films are entrepreneurs as much as somebody who invents something. I think it's very exciting. I'm just delighted, Thomas, that you agreed to join us. I hope our listeners can find out more about Palladium Pictures Incubator Program at palladiumpictures.com/incubator and watch the films. I want to remind everyone the deadline for applying to be part of the incubator program next year is Thursday, December the 5th. And thank you again, Thomas, for joining me today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you to my guest, Thomas Pack. You can learn more about Palladium Pictures Incubator Program on our show page at newtsworld.com. Newt's World is produced by Gingrich 360 and iHeartMedia. Our executive producer is Garnsey Sloan. Our researcher is Rachel Peterson. The artwork for the show was created by Steve Penley. Special thanks to the team at Gingrich 360. If you've been enjoying Newt's World, I hope you'll go to Apple Podcast and both rate us with 5 stars and give us a review so others can learn what it's all about. Right now, listeners of Newt's World can sign up for my 3 free weekly columns at gingrich360.com/newsletter. I'm Newt Gingrich. This is Newt's World.